Okay, so as you asked me, the program is fairly new, and it's been around for 3 years now, and they're just getting right now they're just getting a lot more teachers for other classes to kind of expand on things. And right now, really, they emphasize more on like production. They're doing a lot of intermediate classes at first. We have a class with Christopher Stelly, who is the executive director of the state of Louisiana in the entertainment section. Um, we just added two more teachers, one for like the history of cinema, and also one for production one, where we do a lot of like small projects. We kind of combine sound and pictures, and um, then our third project is going to be like a silent film, making with the class. I understand that there's some acting classes as well that focuses on screen, and there's also working with like a directing class, working with actors and kind of showing them what kind of scene you're doing, and eventually down the line you're gonna film the small scene. There we just added a production 3 class emphasizing on post production and on like After Effects. A lot of tech. We're delving more into a lot of like the technology side of things. But yeah, it's a very new program. So, and we have a lot of equipment that we've gotten over the years. We have an Aria mirror, two Aria mirrors. We have a couple of Lap Magics. We have Ari lights. We have light tubes. We have dolly tracks. So yeah.
And what were what were you looking to get out of what they were offering? Like what was your sort of knowledge level, and what were you hoping, you were going to get taught?
Just the experience in camera. I'm really passionate about being a cinematographer and DP in the future. So I was really adamant on like kind of studying that craft and like learning within like student films. What we actually do have is like we have a Go Film pitch where we kind of go up in front of like the faculty and kind of pitch a script to them, and you get a certain amount of money. It's usually around like $3,000. So what I kind of did when I first started in college is sign up on the Go Films and kind of learn about the ranks. At first I was a script supervisor, helping like continuity and like knowing what the director what take was best. Then I kind of leaned up more into the first AC, second AC on the third one I signed up. And now in November I'm going to be completely DPing a small project. And I'm currently writing the shot list.
Right.
So,
and what is this? Are these? How many years are these programs? 1, 2, 3? What are they? How long, in theory? How many years could you spend going to these classes in theory?
like when I graduate, or
Well, I mean, if you take or if you're taking a production, a class about production, is that a year? Is that 2 semesters? Is before you complete that course? Like, how long are the courses?
usually a semester.
Okay.
And then like you can go up to the higher level classes like production 2, production 3 next semester. It's just you have to like take a certain number of classes in order to get to another one, essentially.
Right. Got it. And how big are the classes?
Well, usually the program usually gets on around like 35 students a year. So some classes are pretty small. Then again, as I've said, it's it's a new program. Usually class is about 20, 25 kids.
Mhm. That's good. And then before you started taking these classes, did you have other friends who were interested in this that you were already sort of hanging out with, or were you kind of on your own?
Yes, actually, one of my roommates, he was in the program before me, and he kind of I've kind of knew about the program the same as him, but I didn't get it until like my junior year due to some complications. I didn't get in at first due to the maximum size of like how many students there. So he was telling me about it and how like it was great working with all the student film kids, and he really kind of convinced me. I thought about being a digital advertising major. I've had many options until like what I was like, why not I just do film? So he kind of helped me like get on track to be in the program.
Good. Well, I mean, it's when things finally started to take off publicly. For me, people would say, "Oh, you never went to film school," and I said, "Well, no, not technically, but what had happened was from ninth grade through 12th grade, I was hanging out with these film students at Coates Hall, so I would leave school, walk across campus, and hang out with them every day and on weekends for 4 years. And I would make shorts and I would work on their shorts. And so that was film school. And at the time, I hope this is still true, there was a very active film screening program on the campus. In addition to, there used to be a repertory house just outside the gates, the Varsity Theater. I don't know if it's still there anymore, but I was seeing a lot of films, during that 4 year period. And so when people ask, should I go to film school? Should I, take film classes? What I ended up telling them was the crucial thing about those years was you need to be part of a gang. Like you need to have a gang. You can't do this stuff on your own. And so those years were formative because it taught me that you need to be part of a gang. And it was really good for me to be part of this particular gang because it forced me to do all the various jobs that you have to do if you're making a movie. Um, and there's a fairly, look, nobody can inject you with the soul of an artist. That's that you either are that or have that, or what they can do and what they should be doing is giving you a sort of strong technical, practical, foundation to be able to express, the ideas and the images that you want to create. The first step, which is, what I started with, is watching a lot of stuff and just developing your taste. What do you like? Like when you see something, you go, I like the way that looks. Breaking down through learning about it. And the good news is these days, there's a lot of material available about how things are made. To learn how did they accomplish that specific effect? If I like the sort of tonality of that scene and the color palette and the depth of it, how did they achieve that? What lenses were they using? What kind of contrast ratios? As you know, if you're working in After Effects, I mean, what you can do now to the image after you've shot it is unbelievable. I mean, we didn't have these kind of options. You had to kind of lay it down on the piece of emulsion the way you wanted it to look. You really didn't have a lot of range in terms of manipulating after. But it's the good news is now look, I've made 2 movies on this. And the movie that I made that's coming out in January, I shot on the new Sony A7. And wow, I mean, that camera is unbelievable. And so there's nobody that can stop you and your friends from just going out and doing whatever you want to do, whether it's part of your class or not. And that's the thing I think I could have used, was the stuff was expensive, the gear was expensive, film was expensive. It took a long time to get it back. And so the ability to iterate quickly and sort of make mistakes and figure things out, it just took a lot longer than it does now. And so even to this day, I'm always carrying this around in case I see something that I just want to put in a sort of visual idea bucket for use somewhere later on. It could be a place that I am, or the way the light is falling somewhere, and I think, oh, that's kind of interesting. So that's the good news, is you've got all the tech, at your fingertips to teach yourself, what you like. But I think the first step is really identifying your taste, your personal taste, how you like things to look. And I believe it's a really important part of being a cinematographer, not just to understand light and sort of simple composition, but to really understand how shots go together. How in an ideal world, the kind of filmmaking I like, the shots sort of link from one to the next. You know what I mean? It's not just a series of random compositions. They build on each other toward something, so that the audience feels like they're being pulled through it. And that's something, honestly, that you can watch and break down, but being on a set where you're shooting and working with the actors is the best way to do it. And that's, like I said, if you've got a gang, then you're most of the way there.
Yeah, over the years, I've gotten to meet like some of the probably the greatest people like in the program, and I kind of sort of like kind of made a game for myself. But I kind of
No, and these are people, that I met in high school,
right.
and I'm still working with them.
So when in the 90s or like the 80s, was there a film like program or major, or is it just like
Well, there was, like I said, literally the first year I was in high school, in ninth grade at U High, that was the first year that they had a film program where they had college students actually making films, and I, you know, glommed on to these people and became the sort of mascot, the child mascot of this film class, and got to know the teacher very well, who I ended up going to work with, who was a documentarian. And so this was like early days, and my understanding is that it kind of phased out for a while before it came back. But this class was strictly a production class. It wasn't like a film history class, which was fine because I was just watching a lot of stuff and reading. So I didn't need that as much as I needed the sort of hands-on film production experience. But look, I think, one of the things to do as you kind of navigate your way through this is to start to talk with your friends about identifying some kind of non-school related but larger scale project that you guys can do, kind of on your own. you know, the other day I was doing an interview about this new film, and somebody said, well, where do you think the most interesting filmmaking is happening right now in the US? And I said, oh, horror films. I go, everything interesting I think that's happening in American movies right now is happening in this sort of horror thriller genre space. You know what I mean? Because well, they're fairly cheap. If you have a really good idea, you can make one of these things for not a lot of money. Um, and secondly, genre films like horror films or thrillers or comedies um, are just a great delivery system for ideas. You know what I mean? So I think Get Out was probably the best example of that. Get Out works totally as just a horror movie. If you just want to watch it as a horror movie, it works. And then it's got all this other stuff that's going on underneath it if you're interested in that stuff. So, you know, I feel like young people who want to go out and make something should be thinking in terms of, I mean, I wrote Sex Lies the way I wrote it because it was cheap. It was like people in rooms talking, like it couldn't have been cheaper. And that was very strategic on my part because I knew nobody's going to give me a lot of money to start, but this thing was really contained. And so I'd start just, you know, hanging out with your gang and start to talk about, hey, you know, has anybody got some ideas for like, you should be thinking about, let's go make a feature.
So from what you're saying, you encourage more of just like more less expensive, but more like kind of practical, more affordable types of filmmaking rather than, you know, thinking of more in terms of like, oh, we gotta, you know, we have to do this and that, but it's more, you gotta, as, you know, college students, we should be, which I kind of agree, be more contained and more, um,
Yeah, think about I mean, the thing that you don't want to be caught in is waiting for permission to go do something. Like I mean, the bottom line is you can make something that looks really, really good for not a lot of money. Like you really can, if you know what you're doing. You know what I mean? So, you know, if you don't know where to put the camera, it doesn't matter if it's an iPhone or a 65 millimeter, you know, movie camera. Like if you don't know where the lens should be, it doesn't matter what capture medium you're using. So I just feel now with the technology available, if I was starting out, I was making short films, you know, during high school and beyond because that was all I could afford, you know, but for the comparative price of what I was making short films for in 1985, I could make a feature now, you know, because all that stuff just costs so much money to rent and the processing and the printing and all that stuff. Like, you know, the last short I made before I made Sex Lies, I think was $15,000, which in 1985, 86 is, you know, that's a lot of money. You can make a feature for that money now.
was it that concert video that you made for
No,
Yes? Or is it
no, that came later. That was funny. But that was something, you know, that I kind of lucked into through freelance editing work that I was doing to make money to pay for these shorts. So that was one of the things I did that, you know, I kind of did that to make money so I could make shorts. But it was an interesting detour.
So from what my dad has told me, during high school, you were referred to as Mr. X. And there was one short in particular that he was telling me about. I don't know if you have it, but it was something where you, well,
Do you still have Skull?
Oh yeah.
Could you send that to us?
Yeah, I've got to figure out there's an issue with the sound. I've got the image, I've got the movie itself. But it's been tricky to get the sound transferred off of Super 8 magnetic full coat in sync to the images that I have. So it's actually something I've been working on lately. That's still actually one of the better things I've done. It's an impressionistic 20-minute sort of take on what it was like, to be at that school that year. And it's sort of built in these little segments, and there's no real plot to it. It was more just a kind of memory film, but it's still one of the better things that I've done. I think there's some really, really interesting imagery, and you could see the relationships, that we all had together very, very clearly, the way we all related. I don't know, it's a nice thing to still have. It's hard to believe, 1980.
Yeah.
But at the very least, if I can't get this together, it's still, to your point of them wanting you to make a silent film, which I think is a good idea. Even if you were to watch it now without sound, you'd still understand it. You would be able to put together what you're looking at, and you would see within it the foundation in terms of the way I've put the shots together and the way the sequences flow of everything I've done since then. It's all there. The grammar that I still use to this day is still in that film from, my senior year of high school. So in that regard, it might be helpful to look at.
And speaking of your filmography over the years, and as I'm watching them, I kind of noticed like a lot of similarities at the beginning of the film. You specifically use a certain type of sound, whether that be narration or a sound effect or even music. Was that something that you've kind of adopted over the years, or was that something that you kind of just naturally started yourself?
Well, I think it's something that I noticed in films that I really liked, that the filmmakers that I was really attaching myself to had a real understanding of how to use sound. I mean, music, I think most people have a sense of how to use music, and music is so powerful that it often gets abused because it's a very obvious way to get a reaction out of people, is just to use a piece of music. But using sound, and especially disconnecting sound from the picture, is something that I was always really intrigued by, because what movies can do, that I think is unique to movies is, as we walk around and experience the world, there are three things happening simultaneously. We're thinking about things that have already happened to us. We're thinking about the things that are happening to us at this particular moment, and we're also conjuring a future of what is going to happen to us. And at times, what film can allow you to do is sort of blend and braid these three things in a way that it's almost impossible to do in any other medium. It's so fluid that way. And sound is a really interesting sort of trigger or tool to be able to put people in a certain frame of mind. And it's also really cheap. Sounds cheap, you know what I mean? And as I work on stuff, even now, if I'm working on a movie, as I'm putting the edit together, I have a subscription to this site called audiomicro.com that's just a vast library of sound effects, and in order to let people know in a rough sort of way, like how I want a sequence to play out, I go to this website, find all these sound effects, download them, put them into the timeline, and it's such an efficient way to create an atmosphere for a viewer. But like I said, at the same time, to me, something you make, in theory, should work without the sound. You should be thinking about how to build images by reminding yourself that somebody should be able to watch this and understand what's happening, the relationships between the characters, the plot. They should be able to look at this thing on mute and still understand it.
Right. And speaking of cinematography, I just recently watched your film Traffic, and I noticed like it's a lot more handheld than any other films, and like the intensity of the color is, you see a ton of like cold and in the blues, and then you see a ton of like intensity in reds and like yellows. Was that a choice that you made working on the film? Like, was it your intention to make it like a documentary, as if like we're kind of with the characters in a way, or as with the
I mean, I was watching. There are two modes, I think, of directing that you need to kind of decide upon before you start. And I'm being somewhat simplistic, but is it an objective point of view, or is it a subjective point of view? So Traffic to me is an objective film in the sense that the camera in theory doesn't know what it's going to see. You are capturing things as opposed to staging them. A movie like Ocean's 11 is, to my mind, a subjective film. The camera absolutely knows where everything is going to take place. And you'll see shots where it's all choreographed and coordinated, to land in a certain place. That doesn't work to me for a movie like Traffic. And to shoot Oceans like Traffic wouldn't work, because on Oceans, you want to feel the design of all of that. The color schemes for Traffic were, during prep, when we were working on the script, I wanted to make sure that as soon as you cut to one of the storylines, you knew exactly where you were, and that you just never had to think about where you were. And so I took, those three looks, the sort of San Diego, Mexico, and East Coast, to a pretty extreme place, because I just wanted to orient people really, really quickly. Like, as soon as you saw a frame of either one of these narrative strands, you knew where you were. And so it really just grew out of that.
I see. And like in Traffic, you hardly ever hear any music at all up until like a certain like amount of points when the guy's seeing his daughter laying on the bed as she's she's all picked up. And what was that significance of kind of inserting those points to insert the music in there?
Well, there are different approaches to scoring. That's Traffic is what I would call a tonal score, as opposed to what I would consider to be a more classical score, which is mirroring what's happening on screen. Like if somebody goes down the stairs or something, like the score is going like do 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 do, like that's a more sort of classical, movie approach to scoring. But I felt like, again, a classical score in which the music is mimicking what's happening on screen for a movie like Traffic would break the spell of kind of eavesdropping on the characters. And so I went for something that was just atmospheric and gave you a feeling more than it was trying to enhance a specific action that was on the screen. And when you can get that to work, it can be really effective. I mean, I think the best example of that in Traffic is very brief and is the result of a couple of things sort of coming to fruition, but it's the scene that ends with the helicopter coming into Mexico City, and there's the upside down shot as it's landing, and the way that the music and the images work there, I thought like that's I like the vibe of that. Like that felt like a good example of an atmospheric score and images that kind of, you know, gave you something that was like a third thing.
I see. And try to I want to go back to cinematography. The way you shoot your movies, it's a lot of tracking shots, long takes, and somewhat quite unconventional from other professional directors in the industry. And you do it quite like uniquely in a way where it's very different. As you know, as I'm watching, you know, Logan Lucky, for example, it's a lot of tracking shots around the bar, you know, the way you kind of shoot your movies in like an office scene. I watched a video on where it kind of talks about don't tell me what you already know. It's more of like you kind of shoot it in a way where it's unique enough where, you know, people already know where the characters are, but it's shot in a way where it's unique. Or like, can you tell me more about that? Like and
Well,
develop your shot.
again, this was something that was, as I was starting to watch films in a different way and with an eye toward making films and developed a taste, what I really appreciated were the occasions where a director choreographed a sort of multiple destination master shot. You know what I mean? Where within this one shot, there were 4 or 5 or more separate compositions, all driven by what the actors were doing or what other action was coming. But when I would look at something that I felt had layers that were sort of shrinking and growing, you know, the image was kind of always evolving. And also, you know, typically information is released in a screenplay through somebody saying something, but there's also a way to release information through how you stage and how you block things, and what you don't see, and then what you reveal with the camera. But I like it when it feels organic and not, you know, we're just moving the camera for the sake of moving it. Like I feel like if you're going to move the camera, you better have a reason to move the camera. And it should be better than if you didn't move the camera. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're just moving it because you're insecure about what you're shooting, that's not a good reason to move the camera. Now, that's why I'm always, whenever possible, if you have a scene with people talking and you're in an office or whatever, if there's any way to organically get them on their feet and moving, you know, even if it's from a chair to a door to anything that can kind of, you know, move within the space and make you feel, you know, where you are, then I'm always encouraging the actors, you know, like, hey, do you think, you know, can we come up with a plausible reason for you to go from here to here? Because it would be a lot better than you just sitting there. sometimes there isn't a solve, and you just have to go with that. But my first impulse is, can we get this thing up on its feet, so that we're moving? And also, no matter how small the space is, I want to show off how much real estate we control, like if you want the thing that you're making, especially if it's a small movie, if you want it to feel big, create shots in which you show off, like, hey man, we locked this whole street up. You know what I mean? Like somebody coming out of a house and going to get in their car, you design a shot that's like 270 degrees, and you're like, wow, I saw the whole street, So I'm always looking for ways to really scale it up and let you know, like, we were there. Like, look at what we did.
And as you've worked on your recent project, Black Bag, has there something that you've recently learned from that production? Is there something like that, like from your cinematography or your use of sound, that you kind of experimented with?
Well, I think it's kind of, I'm trying to work my way back to a kind of the kind of simplicity that only comes from having tried a lot of things and tried a lot of complicated things, sometimes overly complicated things. It's almost, the best analogy I can think of is if you were an artist, an illustrator, trying to get back to the sort of power of something that you would draw when you were 6, before you even had any ideas of what an artist was or what a piece of art was. And there was something just like primal and kind of simple about it. Like I think over the last, 10, 15 years, I've actually been trying to see if I can distill what I'm doing down to its absolute essence and actually keep it really simple, even though in the case of Black Bag, I've got 2 scenes. Talk about not figuring out how to get people up on their feet. I've got 2 scenes of 6 people around a table. And the first one is 12 pages long. And the second one, which is the climax of the movie, is 10 pages long. And nobody's moving. And the process of figuring out how to build the compositions so that you can feel the emotions of the scene shifting, at key points, was both a combination of me having to draw on everything I've ever done to figure that out, and trying to be really, really simple at the same time in terms of what do I want the audience to be like engaged with at this specific moment in the scene, like, and building the shots so that ideally you would notice what I was doing directorially. If you saw these scenes, like, you would go like, oh, that's really interesting. The first 2 minutes of the scene, he's doing this. Then he moves into a different kind of shot. Then he moves into a different kind of shot as the scene moves on. You would notice that. But the goal for me is the audience, they feel the tension rising, but they don't know why. They couldn't articulate why they're feeling that. Only somebody that makes stuff would know. And that's my goal, is to use all of those tools and everything I've learned to put the audience where I want them to be. I don't want to stand between them and the screen, like waving my hands, look what I'm doing. I want them to be like totally locked in. And then for people who study movies, they can go, that was more sophisticated than it looks,
And this next question it's kind of relating to what the film industry is dealing with now. A ton of people don't have jobs and are working 2, 3 jobs out of the industry. And you see a lot of production working in Europe, like in Ireland, and that's because they have better incentives than the US. And my question is, do you think that we need better leadership from our studios, from our executives, or do you think we need to find a way to restructure our incentives? And I would really love to hear your perspective on the film industry as it's evolving right now in terms of its future.
Well, it's in a weird place now because for the first time, we have a couple of entities that have entered the business that are not transparent in how they work financially. And that's a new thing. Prior to the streaming, world, the unions used to get information from all the studios about how the money works. Like for instance, I was involved with the Directors Guild as an elected official for many years. So we had an understanding of how the business worked that even the studios didn't have, because we got information from all of the studios and they only have the information that their studio has. So we were able to look at trends and see like what's happening, like where's the revenue really coming from, what costs are going up, so that we could judge like what should we be asking for, what are the pressure points that we should be cognizant of for them when we go and ask for things. So then the streamers come in and it's a black box. Like they won't tell us what they're spending, how much they're spending, how much they're getting back from these subscriptions. Like we don't really know. And we kind of have to take their word for it. And that makes it very difficult to judge, risk. What should you be spending on a certain project? And then initially, they were very willing to overpay people in order to attract talent. Now, everybody knew that was not sustainable, and it hasn't been. And now we're seeing the result of that. The shrinkage that came with COVID and the strikes was inevitable, but it just happened a lot faster than anybody hoped. But we all knew when this started up, like it was the Wild West, and that there was no way this was going to be like normal forever. Like there just was no way. But we all took the money. So what we're dealing with now is an economic ecosystem that we don't have a full picture of. And then we have two companies that have entered this ecosystem, Apple and Amazon, who are sitting on mountains of cash and don't really need to make a profit in this industry to survive. And so there's a distortion that's taking place that we've never experienced before. It would be an interesting like business school thing to study, is if you take a hyper-capitalist paradigm and then insert two players into it who have mountains of cash but don't need to make a profit. What does that do to everyone else who's used to functioning in a sort of normal, I make a thing for $5 and I sell it for $7 world? That's not the world that these companies live in. Apple got into this business because Tim Cook woke up one day and said, there are a billion of these on the planet. We should put something on them that we made. And Amazon got into the business because Jeff Bezos woke up one morning and said, I want a more intimate relationship with my consumer. And that's a very different reason for getting into the business than storytelling, you know? And so it is a really weird time. I don't know how it's going to shake out. Those two companies have enough money to just hold everybody's head underwater until they drown if they choose to do that. The good news is I'm working with a couple companies now that Neon and Focus Features, which, you know, are releasing, you know, non-studio traditional fare. And I know from talking to people at A24, young people are starting to go to the movies again, 25 and under. They're going and they're educating themselves, and they know who Wes Anderson is, and they know who Richard Linklater is, and there's this whole wave of young people that are going to the movies. So that's good news. And I just think we have to stop using the studio definition of what a success is. You know what I mean? Because to my mind, if you make a movie and it gets bought by anybody or seen by anybody or gets into a film festival, that's a huge success, you know? And so I think we need to, for people just starting out, you know, just don't use their definition of what a success is. If you're working, like if you're able to work, then you made it, like you won the lottery. And so the goal is to just keep doing good work. And my attitude is, if you're doing good work, stuff will take care of itself. Like they're not, I'm here to tell you, talented people don't stay secret for very long. Like they emerge. Everybody's looking for talent. And if somebody's talented, unless they're self-destructive personally, which I've seen, I know people that are super talented that can't get out of their own way and have no social skills, and, you know, they don't have careers. And then I know people that are not that talented and have really good social skills, and they do have careers. So ideally you have both, but talent wins ultimately. That's the good news. And you know, I didn't know anybody in the film business. You know, I was going to U High, living in a suburban subdivision. Like, I didn't know anybody. I just, you know, was lit up about movies.
Right. And would you say to people who are interested in the film industry, or would you say to them like people like me or like anybody else who are either in film school or just like anybody who's very passionate about it, would you say to them go more toward like the independent route? Because from what I've researched about you, you are kind of one of the people that kind of inspired the independent movement. And as we've seen, like what you started, you know, Six Lives and Videotape, it's more prominent now than ever. Than looking at your filmography, it's a lot more relevant, you know, with thinking about things like, you know, relationships, sex, and
Technology.
technology, how that kind of connects that with work.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's more prominent than ever, as we, you know, seen as technology on the rise. People are profiting off of their bodies.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I said, because if you go the independent route, you're not waiting on somebody to say yes to you. You can just go do it. You know, you just get a group together and you just go do it. And it's just the best, even if it doesn't get bought or, you know, blow up a festival, there's just nothing more valuable than having that experience of trying to put a whole thing together from start to finish. the amount that you learn at every step, just, you can't put a price on that. You know, there's stuff that you learn that you only learn from like trying, and that includes just pure storytelling, you know, the 90-minute, 2-hour format, the way those stories work. That's something that you have to sort of learn by doing. I mean, you can learn some of it by watching, but a lot of it you've just got to learn by doing, and just, I kind of call it the dinner table test in terms of the story of your film. If you're at a dinner table, let's say it's a dinner party and there's 8 or 10 people at the table, and somebody says something that reminds you of a story, and you sort of decide to take over the conversation at the dinner table, you better have a story. Like, it better have a beginning and a middle and an end, because those 9 people are looking at you like, okay, you just grabbed the mic. You better have a story. And so I always think of it in those terms, like people are wired for stories, but you better have a real sort of basic sense of this happens and then this happens and then, I mean, Sex Lies, all the books that exist about how to write screenplays and act structures and inciting incidents and all that stuff. I sat down and wrote that, and it was just, okay, something needs to happen. Like, something needs to happen in every scene to pull it, you know. That's all I was thinking. I wasn't thinking about act breaks. I was just like, something needs to happen in every scene. Otherwise, that scene needs to be pulled out of the film, you know. So yeah, keep it simple.
And from what I've read, you've written that in 8 days while you were hitchhiking.
I was not hitchhiking. I would never encourage anybody to hitchhike. No, I was driving. I was driving from Baton Rouge to LA. And yeah, I wrote it on the road, you know. I mean, I thought about it for a year and was making notes. And then the day I left, I started, and it took about a week. Yeah.
Was
But
it
that's unusual. That's unusual.
was it the way you wrote it? Was it something that was it just spontaneous, like as you were writing while you were going to LA? And was it like, as you've said, you've thought about it for a year? And what kind of just made you kind of pull into that story? What kind of made you kind of more interested in it as you've worked on it over time?
Well, I wanted to, you know, and I got like 4 minutes. I got another zoo. I was interested in lying, you know, why people lie, what they lie about. And so I was making notes about that, like why, you know, when people lie, it's because they're trying to get something and they think that telling the truth won't get it for them. You know, it's pretty simple mostly. And then I had one of the oldest setups in the world, which is stranger comes to town and messes shit up. Like, there's a million movies that start with that premise of a stranger coming to town and creating a problem for the people that are in the town. So it was really just fusing those two ideas of why do people lie, and what if somebody rolled up into town who was on a sort of truth-telling, truth-seeking journey and happens to find himself in a house with a bunch of people who are lying, what would happen? You know, that was it.
Right. Well, I really do appreciate you talking
No,
about.
well, look, to be continued. Keep me posted on what's going on.
And
Yeah,
if we could get a link to Skull, that would be
Yeah, I'll work on
Okay, thank you so much.
But yeah, I will keep you posted. You know, I'm looking for opportunities and, you know, trying to get some doors open. And you talking to me is, you know, I've learned a lot over this Zoom for how long has it been? Like 45 minutes. And and I really do appreciate, you know, your wisdom and kind of helping me, you know.
No, it's not. Look, people helped me, so I'm just passing it along.
That's great.
Well, great. I really do appreciate that.
All right.
All right,
Well,
Stephen, thank you so much.
Thank
yep, to be continued.
All right, good deal. Appreciate it.
you. Have a good one.
See ya.